Hello, BookTube, and welcome to June on the Range. June on the Range is a month-long celebration of Westerns, and it's the brainchild of Michael K. Vaughan, and I am one of the hosts, and there are a number of other hosts, which I'll be linking down below in the description. And I've been doing book-to-film books for Westerns, and also I've been reading the short stories written by Clifford Simak, the science fiction writer. And he wrote for a period in the 40s a number of Westerns, 14 that are known. And I'll be reading 12 of those, because that's all I have. And I've read 3 more this week. But I'd like to read you something that he wrote about him writing science fiction. And this was in a speech from 1977 during a Nebula Awards ceremony. And it was published in All Glow magazine. It was a semi-professional magazine. And this is dated summer-fall 1977. And he talks about writing science fiction. He's going just writing in general, really. And then he says, later on, there was another time when I seemed to have lost my touch for writing science fiction. No matter what I did, nothing turned out right. It was at one of those periodic times in a checkered life when I had a great need of money, and with my science fiction touch gone, there were no checks coming in. Out of sheer necessity, I turned to writing westerns for the cowboy pulps that littered the stands in those days. For a solid year, I ground out westerns. That literally is what I did, ground them out. Each one I wrote was almost exactly like the one I had just finished. There was a story formula from which you could not deviate if you hoped to sell. I was ashamed of what I was doing. I began to despise myself. Finally, I chucked it. Never again, I said. I went back to science fiction. Even if I and my family starved, I told myself I would stay with science fiction. Now, I believe it was one of that time there was a strike. Like, he was working at the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, and there was a strike for, I think, the truck drivers, but it also put everybody else out of work, and he had no money coming in, so that's where he turned to westerns. And it says he did it just for a year, but these are published. There's one as late as, I think, 1952 that's published. So either he wrote them and it took a long time for them to get actually published. I don't know the full details of that, because even in his journals, he notes that he got paid for X, but sometimes it's a different date and a different name for a story. But the first one that I read this week was published in Ace High Western Stories, September 1945, and it was the first story in that issue. And again, it's like his journals show a title called Hang Your Guns on a Gallows Tree. And he got paid $175 for it in 1945. But this story is called The Hangnoose Army Rides to Town. Sort of an odd title, and they don't seem to connect. However, it's about a sheriff who is contemplating hanging up his guns, in a sense. So that could very well be the story. And it's a story with Curtis, named Curtis Parker. And Parker was the name of the maiden name of his grandmother. And he really liked her, and he's used that name many times throughout in stories. And it was Ellen Parker, sorry, I think. And that's what he named his daughter as well. Now, another interesting little thing is just a sideline is I did The Searchers, and the real story that it's sort of based on was about a captive story for a Cynthia Ann Parker. I don't know if there's any connection because Parker is, I'm sure, a popular name, but I just like the sort of connection there, if there is a connection. So yeah, so it's about a sheriff who wants to do things right. There's been a killing. One of the ranchers have been killed. The ranchers, the big ranchers, again want to, rub out the nesters, the sodbusters, the farmers. And the sheriff was an orphan, but was raised by a family, and they had a son called Luke, and Luke is accused of killing this person. So Curtis Parker goes to arrest him, and it sort of ensues. They find out what really happened. So there's a lot of shootout, there's gunfight, and again there's a girl that he likes that wants him to give up the job of sheriff and move away to another job, and she's the daughter of a big rancher as well, but he's not a bad rancher. He's one of the good guys, even though he's still not liked in the area. So they find out who did it, and there's a big shootout at the end. There's fist fights. It's the whole 9 yards. I actually really liked this story, and it's partially because there are bits throughout it that, even though it's a short story, it's about 30 pages long, and he very sparingly does descriptions of the environment or things that are around, and they're quite nice. I'm trying to see if I can find one here. But yeah, they're just like one sentence, but they are quite not poetic, but they're quite evocative. And I thought that was really nice, and that made it interesting. And it was more of a personal story as well, because the sheriff is torn for the fact that he's got to arrest essentially his foster brother, and he knows that he's not guilty, but he figures if he doesn't arrest him, then the guys who are accusing him will come and kill everybody probably in the house, including his foster parents and Luke's parents. But then Luke doesn't want, because he knows that the bad guys want the sheriff as well, so he doesn't want to put him in the thing, so he escapes. So it's a bit formulaic in that way, but it is quite good. I'm just sort of scanning through here to see if I can find something, but I probably won't be able to. Yeah, but there are like little sentences that are quite you get a good picture of what's happening, the sound of the birds and things like that, and they're very, very sparse. They're like a sentence, and it works really well. And then next I read Barbwire Brings Bullets, and that was published in May 1945 in Ace High Western Stories again. Sorry. Wait a minute. Oh, wait a minute. Okay. It appeared in November 1945 issue of Ace High Western Stories. And he sent a story named Blood Buys Barbed Wire to an editor in May 1945. So it took this long to get it to get there. There's no amount shown by the editor of the complete short stories to say how much you got paid for it. And it is about a barbed wire salesman who is come to this town, and he's trying to get a deal for the farmers, the sodbusters, the nesters, to buy barbed wire to keep the ranchers out, because the ranchers are encroaching and pushing their cattle through, and nobody seems to be doing anything. But they're scared about the big ranchers, and even the salesman is, accosted, and like they send three guys to beat him up, but he sends them running, and they try to hang him, and he gets sort of saved by somebody else, and then they find a preacher. Him and this other guy that's sort of helping him find a preacher that helps out, but he turns out to be not a preacher. He's somebody else from the company out east that is the barbed wire manufacturer, and is sent to help and to do things. So they all three are sort of want to help this community, but they don't want to. They're scared, and they figured, well, they'll just take the buyout that the ranchers want. But he knows that that's not what they're going to do. They're going to just force their way through, and they do that. They send some cattle through this guy's grain fields and just destroys everything, and they almost kill him. So he decides to take it on himself to string barbed wire it's in a valley, so where the entrance to the valley, string it across the entrance to stop everything. And they're doing this during one night, and they come again. Like the ranchers are coming to sort of destroy all the farmers. So they have a big shootout, and they get entangled into the barbed wire. And it's happy ending. There's fist fights again. There's lots of gunplay, and the salesman sort of gets the girl at the end, daughter of the farmer who was shot defending his property and his grain field. Again, it wasn't quite as good as the first one. It was about a 45-50 page story in here. There's an oddity that Simak writes, and it says, near the bottom of the slope, she caught him, a reeling robot of a man. And he used the words robot in a Western story. And the editor, Dave Wixon, says he thinks it's no doubt a slip up on Cliff's part. But it's weird that the editor allowed it. It just allowed it to go. And then the third one that I read, which I liked a little more so, it's about a peddler, or a drummer, who sent itinerant, and he moves from town to town, and he sells pots and pans. He might sharpen knives, do everything like that, and he sells things. So he's coming back on his normal route. He gets accosted by these couple guys who says, send a message to the sheriff that we're going to come for X guy because he's been arrested. And then he gets sort of saved by that, by a woman, Ma Eldon. I think his name is Ma Eldon. A woman who rides a horse and can use a gun really, really well. So he gets, and he's known, he's a big guy. He's really good with his guns, but when there's two that are already, have the guns pulled, there's not a lot he can do. He's not stupid. But he's been, wanting to set up shop at some point, but he spent all his money to buy this beautiful black horse that he's called Satan. And Ma tells him that her daughter Caroline's coming back from school out east, and he's sort of sweet on her. So another sort of girl, in the picture. She's coming in on stagecoach. He goes into the town. He meets the doctor, and the doctor mysteriously says, I want to give you a letter, and I don't come, I'll give you a letter tomorrow morning, and if I don't come back in like 5 days, you send this letter. You post it, you mail it. He goes into town. His horse is stolen. The stagecoach comes in. The stagecoach rider is dead. The stagecoach driver is dead, and one of the passengers is in there. Sort of somebody who's sort of dressed real slick out east wise. But Caroline is gone. They figure she's been taken hostage. So a posse gets up, but our hero Harrison, Johnny Harrison, he gets an idea, and he springs. He helps the guy that's in the jail escape, and he wants them to take him to the hideout, because he said he's got to hide out, because he's sort of set things up, unbeknownst to him that it's a logical story, because he goes in to give the information to the sheriff or the marshal, and the marshal says, "Oh, well, this is maybe I should run you in. You're giving me the message and all this stuff." And he grabs the sheriff and almost lifts him off the floor, punches him, and then walks out. And the sheriff, tries to pull his guns on him too, but Johnny is much quicker than he is. So the guy at least saw the punch in the jail, and so it made sense to the guy, the Westerman, that he's springing from the jail, and they head off. But then the sheriff comes, and it's kind of a bit convoluted in some ways, because everything this Harrison does falls through, because the guy takes one of Johnny's guns and heads off and leaves him and says, "You're not coming with me." And the sheriff, is sent off. But then he goes back to town. He figures out, well, what can he do? And the doc, he figures, will help him. But he goes to see the doc, and he's got a knife in his back. But there is a letter that he was writing, and there was enough pressure on it that the letter's gone, but there's the impression on another page below, and he sees that it was to federal agents, to say that the rustlers, the cow rustlers, are in this valley, he thinks. And but then while Johnny is there, this slick guy that was on the stagecoach comes in, and it's pretty clear that he's the one that knifed him. So Johnny shoots him, escapes, and he knows that if he goes to this this other guy, this hermit type person that's out in one of the valleys, that he'll tell him where this other valley is, where they are. So he does that. He goes to the valley, and he says that he'll trade the letter for the girl and his horse. But then the sheriff comes in and says, "Hey, I got the letter for you," because the sheriff is bought as well, which doesn't quite work. I don't know why the guy was in jail then. So there's a little discontinuity there a little bit, but it was sort of, again, fairly well written, I thought, other than that. And so he finally does escape. The girl's mother has sort of sent their Chinese cook comes along, and is a dead shot, and helps them escape. And then the mother comes, and they round everybody up, and the whole thing had to do with the county was going to be split, and this one guy didn't want it because he's running things. So it's a bit convoluted, but the interesting thing is that it's the second time where he's got a Chinese cook, that he has a character that saves the day, at the last minute. He completely saves the day, and I found that quite interesting, because I don't know how many, it would be as a hero, Chinese cook. He does talk about that he talked in a sing-song voice, but you know, you can't have everything. But yeah, and his story so far, this is the 9 stories I've read, and none of them have to do with cowboys and Indians, more or less. There are sort of cowboys, they're ranch hands, but they're not that. They're sort of the bad guys, but they're not a big part of the story. This is sort of after the West has sort of been decimated of the Indians, and it's towns that have grown up, but they're still sort of lawless in many ways, and he's writing stories about that rather than the cowboys and Indians, because Indians are only mentioned tangentially, just just very briefly, but not as any important thing in the stories, because it's after that time, and it's sort of law coming, or civilization coming to the West, in the towns after the range, the big range ranches have been established, but then the sodbusters are coming in and disrupting them, and the fight that's happening, and then in the middle story there, the Barbwire, and then they're all good stories, but again, like he obviously Simak didn't really care for them. They are very formulaic, and they're very, very similar. But a lot of westerns are very similar. The general thing of the stereotypical story. It's always somebody coming to town. A lot of times, in this kind of era, somebody coming to town. There's corrupt politicians, or the ranch owners are corrupt and trying to do something, and it's like one person is the one that's the catalyst to save everybody. It's either he single-handedly does it, or he's the one that brings everybody together finally to do something. So, but they're still, like I say, they're still fun. So there'll be 3 more for next week. I had hoped to do. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this, because I still have 2 booked films to do by the end of the month. And one is Warlock, but that's quite a long book. Well, it's a longer book than normal. It's than a lot of the westerns. It's about 550 pages long. So I might leave that out for a little while, until next week, and do True Grit first, because that's a much shorter book. Crikey, I could read that in the morning, in a good morning's reading. So it's very short. It's like 160 pages maybe, or something like that. So next week, but then hopefully next Tuesday, I will finish up with the Simak westerns. Take care, BookTube.